Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Bloom the Podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode. We're happy you're here. If you are new here, I'm your host, Donovan, and I'm here with the one and only co-host, Ashley.
What's up, guys?
Hope you all are doing well, and hope you guys are glad to be back for another episode 45. We're pumping these episodes out, and I'm enjoying it. I hope you all are enjoying it as well. What about you? You're enjoying it?
Heck yeah.
It's been a good time. I hope you guys are enjoying all the previous episodes. We had a really fun one last week talking about Christians and how they are supposed to approach desiring success. So if you guys didn't see that, make sure you guys go check it out. It was a really good conversation. We had a good time. But jumping straight into today's episode, we've got a fun one. Starting with the Bloom moment of the week. So on this segment, if you guys are new, we tell you guys a little bit about what the Lord is doing in our life from week to week. It could be really anything, whether it's something you're learning spiritually, just something practical that you're doing, whatever it is. Feel free to share what you guys are learning as well in the comments. We would love to see it. So I'll start off this week. I usually let you go first usually. For me, I would say this week it's been consistency. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but I think the Lord has had it on my heart to just really push myself to be consistent in the things that I do, whether that's, getting up every day to read the Bible, or, just being consistent with work, being consistent with the stuff that I do on the side, like just being consistent. And, that affects a lot of different areas in your life, especially when it comes to Bible reading. Because if you're not consistent with Bible reading, stuff gets out of whack real quick. So just really narrowing in and really pushing myself to be consistent in reading the Word and praying. That's been a big one as well. Just trying to get both of those dialed in and, be in the best place spiritually as I can be.
Right. That's good.
What about you?
For me, I think a big thing would be prayer. So that's actually something we're going over at our church too, just the importance of it, and the importance of praying for other believers too. And I've just seen a big shift when I pray, especially with I can see the difference in how joyful I am during the day. Yeah. Because you're just carrying all these heavy loads, I feel like, when you're not praying. You're not giving anything to God, so you're carrying it on your own shoulders. Yeah. And that's a heavy weight to carry all the time. So I don't know, it's just felt really good to set aside times where I can actually pray, but not just hey God, like I said last time. Hey God. Or a quick prayer. Those are fine, but actual times where you can sit for a good amount of time and just say everything you need to say. So
yeah, that's super important. And like you said, it's that burden that we carry. I mean, that's so true. We carry that burden so much. And then just the the relational side, if we're not praying, we're not really talking to God. Even if we're reading the Bible, we're not saying anything back. We're not conversating. We're not really having that relationship with the Lord. So yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, for sure. But that is the Bloom moment of the week. Hope you all enjoyed that. Feel free to let us know what you guys are learning and how the Lord is growing you guys individually. We would love to hear about it. So feel free to either message us directly or go to the comments and, if you want to be a little more bold about it. But jumping into today's episode, we've got a good one. We're going to talk about something I think probably every single Christian can say that they've gone through. And that's the struggle with assurance of salvation. There is so much there to be said. And everyone goes through it at different times in their life, maybe multiple times. I know I've gone through it multiple times, where you really just aren't sure about your salvation. You don't know where you're going to go when you die. You kind of think about the end times, if I was to die today, what would happen and where would I go? And that's a scary thought. It's especially, if you aren't on the right side of things and if you aren't really saved, it's a very, very scary. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about our experiences. We're going to share a little bit about our own lives, how we've gone through that. and kind of share how we've gotten through it, and how the Lord has brought us to the other side, closer to Him. So I'll pass it off to you first. What was your first experience like with dealing with assurance?
Awful. But low-key.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I feel like I first came across it more so after I became a believer when I was like 8, I would say.
Yeah.
But my parents wanted us to wait. Our parents wanted us to wait to get baptized.
My dad.
Yeah, my dad. My parents wanted us to. I can't talk.
Bro, you good?
Our parents wanted us to wait to get baptized until we were a little older, so we could be sure. And so I'd say the first time I dealt with it was like finally when I was like old enough, and I was like, yeah, I'm a Christian. They're like, great, like you should get baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah. But then there was like a time of silence for a little bit where I wasn't getting baptized, and that was because I was worried, like, okay, this is like a huge step, so like you have to be absolutely sure. And so I was really just like hanging on to like all these things. Like basically I felt like because I wasn't a perfect Christian that maybe I wasn't a Christian. Like it was just all these lists that I had to get right before I could say I was a Christian. Like, oh, like, and my biggest one was like, oh, I don't know enough.
Yeah.
Which is that's so lame, because I mean that was years ago, and there's so much I don't know. So it's like you're never gonna know everything. So for me to be like, oh, like maybe I'm not a Christian because I'm not at this level yet, like it was basically me just coming up with a list of things that I felt like I had to be good at before I could say that I was like for sure a Christian.
Yeah, I think I had a somewhat similar experience first time I got saved. I was a little bit older than 8. I was about 12 or 13. I can't remember if I was 12 or 13, but early teens, and I like had a very, very convicting first moment of like when I got saved. Like I remember it like this. Whenever I tell my testimony, that's the moment I speak about. But after that, I feel like I fell into a really big like high school kind of just like slump where I didn't really care that much. I was very stagnant, and it was around the time when I got baptized, because I was also like the parents wanted us to wait until we were a little bit older, and I had been trying to get actually baptized for a couple years, but we ended up moving a couple times, and we didn't have a good home church for about a year, so there was a little bit of a gap there where I kind of was just in limbo waiting to get baptized. And I remember after I got baptized, the first time it like really, really hit me was the first time I was going to take communion. It was that like following Sunday. And, every time, the pastors do communion, they talk about like, if you're not saved, don't partake of communion. Like it's not for people that are not believers.
You look around.
And I was just like sitting there, and I was like, should I take this?
Everyone will see if you don't.
Right. Well, I mean, it wasn't even that. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. And because I had felt so stagnant, and I felt like this pressure to take it, obviously because I had just been baptized, and I was like, this is what this is for. But I was also just second guessing like pretty much my whole 17 years of life. I'm not really sure exactly what I believed and why I believed it. There was a lot of doubt because of how I was raised. We were both raised in Christian home where we were taught the Bible since the day we were 0. Since the day we were as fresh out of the womb, we were hearing the gospel. We were brought to church at Bible studies. I mean, that's all we really knew. So I think a lot of it was me just associating my belief in God being real, because that's all I knew, to actually living for Him. And yeah, that was like I said, a frightening time, because I did take it that day. I took it, and I really just had to check.
Like, am I gonna get striked down?
Seriously, I was like, well, I just took 30 years off my own life by doing this. But I mean, and the message that day was very fitting as well, because it was talking about kind of living a lukewarm Christian life. And that's exactly how I felt. And after hearing that, it kind of just like inspired me to kind of revamp my, just like really dig deep into why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I'll pass it back to you. After kind of that first initial shockwave of like, am I saved? What were some of the things that you came away from that with? Like, I guess, how should I say? Like, after kind of passing through that wave, what was it like on the other side for you after kind of figuring out where you were at? And how did you actually get there? Like, what brought you to the other side?
I think kind of what brought me there is I just kept like thinking, like, I know for a fact, I can't talk today, guys. I know for a fact that I want to be saved.
Yeah.
And God doesn't turn away people who want to be saved.
Yeah.
Like, so it was honestly like so simple. Like in my mind, I was like, I want this so bad and I'm freaking out like I can't have it, even though if I want it this bad, then he's gonna give that to me, you know. Obviously you have to do your part. You can't just be like, I want it, and like do whatever. But I was like, I want this, and he's not gonna turn me away. So that kind of like helped me get like my head straight. I mean, I was already saved, but with the doubt part, it was like, I'm already saved, but either way, like, he knows my heart, and that I'm not just like I kind of could care less about it, you know.
Yeah.
So that was like comforting. And also just like, I think when you're a believer, you always have a want and like a desire for God, even when you don't have a want or desire for God. Does that make sense? Like when you're in the deepest drought of not wanting to read your Bible, or you haven't prayed in a while or really talked to God in a while, there's like this want to be like, I want to be right with him. I want to be better. I want to like spend time with him. It's just about getting there.
It's very existential. It's kind of like when you have a lot of homework or you have a lot of work to do, but you're not doing it. And then you're stressed by the fact that you're not doing the work, but you could easily just go and do the work.
Exactly.
So it's like a double stress and just keeps going in a cyclical pattern. That's kind of how it is. And yeah, a lot of times, like you said, you'll have that desire even when you don't, because, and that's a good sign to say that you are saved.
Exactly.
I mean, we can kind of touch on this a little bit. Like, go ahead. You carry on then. I don't want to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say that was something that like always encouraged me, because anytime I thought about it, I was like, oh man, like I want to do this. And it was constantly something I was thinking about.
Yeah.
You know, that's also another thing. It's like constantly on your mind because it's important to you. It's not like, I'm just kind of putting that back because I don't really want to think about like if I'm a Christian or not. It was like, no, I have to figure this out because I'm like terrified and I want to be right with him, you know, but like it's more so like, oh, I just don't know how. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, so I feel like that's kind of what showed me. Like, I was way more confident in that once I saw, because this time was for a little while. Mm-hmm. So it was like comforting to me to see, guys, I can't get me off. You need to get her to co-host.
Speech therapy.
It was very comforting for me to like see how long my desire lasted. Like it never went away, my desire for him. So like, I knew even now I still have droughts or whatever where it's like, it's been so long. But like, there's always that thought in my mind that's like, you don't just need to do this, but you want to do this. Like, don't be a fool.
Yeah. And I think it's so true. Even when you're in those ruts and you're struggling with assurance, the fact that you're even asking yourself that question of like, am I saved? Because someone who isn't saved isn't going to care that they're not saved, isn't going to care that they aren't right with God. They're not going to care that they're far from him. So it's a really good starting point to kind of have that baseline of, okay, I'm asking this question because I know what my heart really needs to, where my heart needs to be. And that's, like you said, it's always an encouraging thing. I think for me, kind of getting out of that, it was a little bit later on, because it wasn't even after that where I improved a little bit, but I still went through some slumps, and there was a few areas in my life that just were not addressed. And, you know, God brought me through a couple different trials, and it was kind of after those, after kind of being really low, where the Lord kind of showed me exactly where my heart was. And kind of like you, where I wasn't desiring God, but I was at the same time, because I didn't have any interest in a lot of things that had to do with church and stuff, but something in me kept telling me to go, just like, hey, go to church. And I was living on my own at this time, And I would just, because I didn't have any accountability, I was living on my own, so I could have not gone, and no one would have known. But my heart, something in my heart was just like, go to church. This is where you're supposed to be. And after just going and going week after week, it kind of just started to revive my passion for why I was there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard a message that was talking about Philippians in Philippians 1:6, where it talks about he who started a good work in you will complete it to the day of salvation. Or I think that's how it goes. I might be saying that somewhat wrong. But that verse right there kind of really encouraged me and really highlighted the fact that I'm going to be messed up my whole Christian life. And that's not the point. The point is I'm messed up and the Lord still died for me. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of after going through everything that I went through and seeing how the Lord still preserved me through this time or through that time and kind of brought me to the other side to show me all my flaws and all of my mistakes and all my deficiencies and said, I still love you anyway. And it was just, I can just remember just being so shook again, almost like I had like, not like I wasn't saved before, but just like
refreshed feeling.
Yeah, it was just like a refreshing gospel to me again. It was just like,
'cause it's like carrying that weight.
Yeah. Yeah, and like how it talks about in Revelations when it says you've lost your first love. I think that's ultimately where I was at that time, because I just wasn't thinking about the gospel and what the Lord has done in my life. And how he brought me from a life of only caring about myself to wanting to have a relationship with him. Right. And I think that was just a super encouraging thing.
Right. I think people like forget that we're never going to like love him perfectly or like always desire him. It's like this. You get married, right? And your marriage is important. And you're one flesh. But there's going to be times where you don't love your spouse the way you should love them, or you and your spouse go through a rough patch and there's this whole rift between you two, but you're still together. Like, you are still one flesh. Yeah. But there's all this, like, baggage in between. And as sinners, that's always how it's going to be as believers, is, like, you're going to go through a bunch of times in your life when you don't love God the way you should because you live on this world and you're a sinner. So I feel like we just like are expecting better things from ourselves, like, I can do this, but like we can't, because we're incapable of loving someone perfectly.
What I think it is too, and like you kind of said, like you were kind of alluding to, I think it's mainly a pride thing from the flesh, because I think a lot of times we think we need to earn God's love in order to have salvation. Mm-hmm. Like we have to do, and that's where 99% of other religions go to, is you have to work your way and be a good person and do all these things so that way God will love you. And that's just completely not true. There's no amount of good works we could do to earn our way into heaven. And once we realize that, I mean, I think that's just a huge mindset change.
Yeah, once you realize you'll never be good, but God loves you anyway, then you'll be cruising, bro.
Yeah.
Like, you're never going to be where you need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's just remembering the difference between justification and sanctification, because a lot of people forget that justification is the one-time act of Christ dying on the cross that allows us to be close to him, and it allows us to have a relationship with him. And sanctification is what the Lord does in our life to make us more like him in our Christian walk. So I think a lot of times when we're not seeing the fruit that we want to see in our lives, we forget that it's going to be Christ that does the work in us. Not that we don't have to try, but it's going to be the Lord that ultimately does that work in us. Like Philippians says, he'll complete that work in us. Not that we're going to do it so that way we can say, oh, how great of a Christian we are, but the Lord is going to bring that to fruition, and he's going to bring that out of us. And, I look forward to having the Lord grow me each and every day to be more and more like him, because, we all need to be desiring that ultimate, growth and trying to be more like Christ.
Definitely.
So I would ask you, what would you say are some good things for people that are in that place, that are kind of struggling with, are they saved? What would you tell someone who's going through that and kind of in that rut and really doubting themselves? Maybe they're not seeing fruit in their lives the way they want to, or they feel like they've sinned too much. Like, what would you tell someone in that situation?
Well, I feel like we'd kind of have a conversation like me and you are having right now,
Yeah.
but also just like, asking them those questions like, do you want this? Like, deep down in your heart, do you desire these things,
Yeah.
Like, you said, kind of like the analogy, like you're going to college, right? Because you want to get the degree and like get a good job, but then you're slacking on the homework, but you still want the college degree. It's like kind of the same thing, like we want God, but we're going to slack during that because that's just how we are. So really getting down to the heart desire, if they really desire that, and I tell them to pray about it, because praying about it will make things clear for you, definitely. And I think even when you're not seeing fruit necessarily, I feel like if you're really a believer, that there's always going to be some kind of fruit that you can see in your life, even if it's just that you truly desire him underneath the fact that you're slacking, or because like your heart, like you want to pray to him, or you want to serve with the church, or you have a heart for like sharing the gospel, like whatever it is. I feel like everyone has their own specific gift and like what they feel drawn to, but I feel like there's always some kind of fruit that you might not see as fruit, but it is fruit, and you need to like search your heart and be like, okay, what do I see in my, like, along this time I've been a Christian, what do I see in myself, and do I, like, what is my heart motive for like doing these things? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's a super important point that you just made about the fruit in your life, whether it's small or whether it's really large. Because I think, I forget where the verse is, but it talks about how there's 30-fold, 60-fold, and 90-fold fruit. And sometimes, I mean, everyone matures and grows at different paces. So one of the things that kind of held me up earlier on in my life was kind of looking at people in my age group that I thought were so much further along than me in their Christian walk, or people that I knew that were just seemed so much more spiritually mature. And I was like, why am I not seeing that in my life? And it's again, it comes down to a pride thing. We want to be at this place and we think that we can get there on our own, but the Lord has to do that in us. And like you were saying, everyone grows at different paces. So just really focusing on whatever fruit that you can see in your life and really being honest about it.
And I'd also say that when you have that mindset of like comparing yourself to another believer, you're like putting God in a box. You're like, well, I can't be your child if I don't match up to this, and that. It's like, did God tell you that? And you say like, you can't be a Christian if you don't know much about this subject as the other person does, or you can't be a Christian if like, you're not on the worship team. This person is. That's a fruit, like it can't be like that. Like, you're putting God in a box when you're doing that, which is exactly what I was doing. Like, oh, well, just putting words in his mouth basically that he never said.
Yeah. So. And I think also on the knowledge note, I think that can be a double-edged sword. I know for myself, that was one of the big hindrances for me, because I felt like I knew so much because I was raised up in the church and I've been at church my whole life. I felt like I knew a ton of stuff, but it was all empty calories because my heart wasn't there. And I think that's one of the challenges for people that grow up in the church, is distinguishing between your knowledge of God and your love for God. And that's where I would say to anyone that's kind of in that position, where you really need to analyze your heart and figure out exactly why you believe what you believe. And I always say that, I mean, and this is just, I think, common, but your why is the most important question you can ever ask yourself. So, when you're talking about your Christianity, if I was, and you are proclaiming to be a Christian, I would ask you, why are you a Christian? And if you're saying, oh, because I know about God, or I've been at church my whole life, so that doesn't matter. That doesn't make you Christian. And that's what I had to tell myself, because after 17 years of growing up in the church, I realized that all of my knowledge and all of the stuff that I learned in Sunday school and being under great pastors didn't mean anything until I actually believed it for myself. Like, there has to be a point in every person's life where they can say, I actually believe this for myself, regardless of my surroundings, regardless of what anyone tells me, because I see this in my own life and I know this to be true.
And I think also another thing to also pay attention to when you're examining your heart is if you have like brokenness over your sin, or if you're okay with living in your sin, because I feel like even when you're in the biggest drought ever, you still have conviction over sin when you're a believer.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling like weighed down and you're like, oh, like I just feel like so awful about these things, that is a really good sign that you know, like, you care that you're offending a holy God. Like, that's a great sign, honestly. That's why it's always like, it's really interesting to like see people who are like questioning their salvation. They're like literally broken down crying, like, I just want to be. I'm like
that's the fruit right there.
I'm like, this is what you're doing. Like, you care. You're sobbing like God won't accept you or forgive you, but like he will. So it's really just this thing that goes on, like, it's an inner battle with yourself. You're battling yourself.
You're battling the lies of the devil, because that is what tells you that he won't forgive you if you keep messing up.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately comes down to a wrong view of God and how we look at him as only judge. You know, we don't see any of the love towards us. And if we're a believer, he doesn't see us how we see us. He sees his son. Mm-hmm. And it's important to remember that. Not to say that so that way we can use that as an excuse to sin, but it should give us the courage to fight sin more because of what Christ has done in our lives. Mm-hmm. When we can confidently say Christ sees a clean slate, no matter how many times I try but still mess up. Mm-hmm. And that's just, you know, the beauty of the gospel is just really living that truth. Because I think a lot of us know that truth, and I know this was me, and this still is me sometimes. We believe it, but we don't functionally live it out. Like, our lives would look so much different if we functionally lived that out in a way that was like actually tangible, where we could say, I'm fighting sin because I want to please the Lord, and I want to obey, and I want to live in this truth of the gospel, that he gave me the ability to say no to my sin and to be free from sin. And that's just a very I know it's encouraging for me.
Yeah, definitely for me too. It's just it's always going. I feel like for a lot of people, it'll be a reoccurring issue for people who just are doubtful of themselves, or you know, like they have that. Some people are way more sensitive to sin than others. You know, some people are like, I just can't get out of bed. Like, I'm such an awful person, you know? Yeah. And some people like that are going to struggle often with feeling like, oh, I'm not saved because I don't meet my own expectation. Yeah. But I think it's just important to know who God is at that point, and know that, like, what you think you should be doing or like expecting from yourself is different from what God says he expects from us. Like, obviously we have to put in our effort and stuff, but we're going to fail, and God knows that. So we need to know that. Yeah,
that's awesome. And another note too, kind of just to jump on top of that, is to have people in your life that can reinforce that for you. Because, I mean, we had a great support system with family, but even outside of that, and I've talked about Will Chung a bunch on this podcast, but I'll bring him up again. Just another one of those people in my life that when I was going through each kind of phase of, first it was kind of the assurance issues, and then it was going through trials, kind of up and down with anxieties and depressions and stuff like that, to kind of going to the other side, right there with me each step of the way, kind of reinforcing stuff that I already know to be true. I mean, but really,
hearing it from someone else too.
Someone outside looking in at your life and can say, I can see this in you. Mm-hmm. And that's so important, because when we're fighting this battle on our own, that's not how it's supposed to be. The Christian life is not a lone wolf life. It's a community. It's the body of believers. That was
literally just what my pastor said. Exactly that. He was like, there's no such thing as a lone wolf Christian.
Yeah. I mean, and I've heard that so many times growing up, but yet I still have this urge to fight everything internally by myself. Right. And it's so important to lean on the people in your church body, your friends, your fellow believers. Like, I just had dinner last week with a good friend of mine from my church, and just such an encouraging time, just being one-on-one with another believer, talking about your struggles, talking about your successes in the Lord, talking about the way you were able to fight sin or failed in sin, just whatever it is, just being honest and transparent with one another. So that way you can have another person look in your life and encourage you in every way, and it's just so much more helpful and helps a ton with assurance of salvation.
I definitely say if you're struggling with that, to not keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Because when I was going through it, I didn't tell anyone. I don't really know why. This is just some stupid teenager doing weird crap. But, you know, I was all like, oh, like it was like something to be ashamed of, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, what are you doing? Like, if you're not saved, then, oh my gosh, like, you're the worst, you know, not even like, okay, whoa, maybe someone could be helpful with this. But also, I think you brought up a good point, is there are so many, like, there's been so many times where I talk to other believers and they like tell me about fruit they've seen in my life that they've been thinking about, like, oh, just the way you do this, like, oh, and I'm like, what? Like, I don't see that. So it's like, there's so many, like, as humans, it's easy to get down on ourselves and not be able to see our own fruit because we see our faults so clearly. But that's why it's so important also to talk to other people, because they also can see, when you're open with them about that, they might be able to be like, what are you talking about? Like, I've seen this fruit in your life. Like, why are you questioning yourself? You know, like, give you that encouragement, even though obviously some people might not be saved and there can still be fruit. Not really, but fruit. But in general, like, it is an encouragement to hear from other people that you're not just a failure, because in our minds it's easy to make ourselves out as that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just being open and honest about where you're at is just a huge thing with the Christian life. It's easy to be a PC Christian and just say what you think that, you know, people want to hear. And that was another one of the stumbling blocks for me at the church I was at when I got baptized, because they wanted me to tell my testimony in a way that I didn't want to tell it. And they kind of wanted it to be more grand scale and kind of more...
your testimony wasn't dramatic enough.
Right. And that was something for me where it was very hard for me to kind of just be like, but this is what the Lord did. And it made me second guess myself even more, like, or did he? Because it's not matching up. You don't
even know your actual testimony.
Right,
anymore.
Because it wasn't matching up to the way that they were telling me it should sound. And if it wasn't for that person in my life, Will Chung, kind of backing me up and being like, if this is your testimony, this is your testimony, and tell it the way that it's supposed to be told. And that was just one of the most empowering moments in my life where I was like, yeah, this is my story. This is what the Lord did in my heart. And, you know, just the power of other believers in your life, you can never, you know, overstate it.
Right.
So I would encourage anyone who's struggling with that, just get someone you're close with that's a believer and really confide in them and tell them about yourself.
And you would be so surprised how many believers are going through the same thing you are. Like, when you actually talk about it and they're like, me too. That's why it's just so important to be honest, because if you're like, oh no, I'm like totally chilling, how about you? And they're like, yeah, I'm chilling. Like, don't lie to each other. Like, we all have our own issues. Even if it's a different issue, it's still an issue that burdens them as well. Like, just talk honestly to each other and encourage each other.
Yep. I was just talking to my friend about that, and we were just talking about that's the beauty of Christian fellowship. I can talk to anybody about coffee or about movies or video games, but what I can't do is talk to any random Joe Schmo about how my heart is burdened by wondering if I'm going to heaven or hell. I can't do that with anybody else.
Big deal. Yeah, and I would just say also, like, the importance of, like, not sitting on it. Because you don't know when your life is going to be over.
Yeah.
So to think you have time to figure it out is a bad mindset. I would say, like, I need to figure this out now. Like, I need to spend the rest of my week or the rest of this day figuring out, like, really, like, asking myself the hard questions, talking to someone. Like, don't think, okay, like, I'm just gonna, like, let this chill for a sec, and then maybe, like, in a month I'll talk to someone, or maybe I'll, like, don't do that, because the last thing you want to do is wait it out. Like, you don't know how much time you have.
Nothing's promised. You could walk out onto the street, get hit by a bus, and that's it.
Yeah.
And as morbid as that sounds, that's the reality of life. It's a vapor.
Right.
There's so many tragedies that happen for people that aren't even over the age of 10 that get killed or their life ends, and you never know when your time is up.
And this is the most important question you can ask yourself. So,
and that's why it's scary if you are on the other side. Assurance of salvation is really no joke, and you know that's why it's such a important thing, like you said, to get onto the table as soon as possible. So that way, you don't have to live another second in that fear of, am I going to heaven or hell? Because that is the most paralyzing fear.
Yep.
So with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Bloom the Podcast. If you guys want to talk to us about anything regarding assurance of salvation, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk to you guys. We're not perfect, and we still go through this stuff on a daily basis, so we're more than happy to, bounce scriptures off each other and really talk about it and, be there for each other. So feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to speak with you guys. We're happy to listen to you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly episodes, and we will see you all on the next episode.